So if we talk first about ATOM, Australian Teachers of Media, it's essentially 5 state-based associations in Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, Northern Territory and Western Australia. And they're constituted essentially to run professional development workshops and seminars for teachers of screen and media. So the association side of it is very much focused on keeping teachers of screen and media literacy up to date with whatever's going on in that world. The ATOM Victoria established the education shop about 20 years ago and started publishing Metro magazine, I think in 1967. The education shop essentially houses Australian-produced educational resources, whether they be e-books or teacher guides or any other kind of publications which have a relevancy or play predominantly into the secondary school market. We do have a small penetration into the primary, which we're trying to build. But primarily what the education shop does through the production of study guides is support Australian screen content into the classroom. So we are pre-approved by Screen Australia to produce study guides alongside any content, factual or scripted, that they have invested in. So essentially producers have to produce a study guide if they've got Screen Australia funding. And we're pre-approved, and without skiting, we produce the best study guides. So we get that's our major traffic flow, is producing those study guides, and they're aligned with Australian predominantly factual content, and they're designed to get students using that content in the classroom. Now, every guide has an element in it which addresses the issues of media and screen literacy, but we produce guides across the curriculum. It could be anything from civics to geography to history, sport, and that's predominantly what we do, is support Australian screen-produced content into Australian classrooms. Metro magazine is when I came, I've only been in this position for a year. When I came in, the magazine was not in a healthy financial state, so we've at the moment kind of paused its production, but we are committed to bringing Metro physical back into publication. We will continue to publish online, and the reason being is that it's such a beautiful magazine. It really does sit in that perfect place just below high academe, where you're going into the deep dive into film theory, and well above the day-to-day tabloid kind of coverage of screen and media content. And I suppose Metro's has always taken that position, that it needs to be readable, but it needs to be informative, and it has to treat the content that it's covering in a serious way, and really use great writers who are embedded in some way into the industry, either as academics or practitioners, to deliver that content in a way that, again, it has high value, not just to lovers of, not just to the cineast, but also to students, to teachers. It allows them to actually take a substantial look at the content. Look, the media landscape, if you can call it media, has so splintered and fractured since the advent of social media, allowing any person to deliver what they believe to be news, when in fact it's more generally opinion, and it's not based in the basic principles and tenets of journalism, which is heavily researched, heavily authorised before it's published. And you've got all sorts of, from the left to the right, you have all sorts of commentators who now call themselves people who are delivering news. And news fundamentally has to take an objective view. A journalist can't or shouldn't impose their own personal belief structure into the presentation of the story. Their personal belief structure can drive them into the researching of the story, but by the time it comes to telling that story, it actually has to be informative, it has to be news. And what social media has done has just allowed people with strongly held and fervent opinions to take a camera like this one, give themselves a backdrop, set themselves up as purveyors of news, when in fact they're not. They're just purveyors of opinion. I mean, one of my favourite examples, and it's kind of minute, during the Yes campaign, there was a fabulous video that came out with a First Nations man sitting with two women in a pub. And they were, playing the kind of very conciliatory European, talking to a First Nations man, saying that they didn't know how to vote, and his question was, well, why are you having a hard time finding any news? Why are you having a hard time finding what you need to know? And their response, and I think it was a good one, I saw on social media, I think I heard something on, a various feed, and they were taking that as news. They were taking that to inform them. So, there's a great issue with me in terms of fake news. You'll never get rid of it. It's not like it's not always been there. We didn't have to get to social media for it to be so widely disseminated. But social media just pushes it out even further. The issue is that people are turning away from true news sources. And that to me is the issue, that they're so blasted with all sorts of endless media platforms saying, we've got the story, we've got the news, we can tell you, we're with you, that they're not even going to respected, established, authoritative news sources. If we live in liberal modern democracies, which most of us do, we don't really suffer media censorship, we suffer media clutter. So media, in a sense, because it's now so broadly available across all sorts of voices, is just cluttering itself. I don't think for an instant that you should stop the clutter in any way at all. What I think we need to do is educate, and from a very young age, in media literacy, embed in the user as they grow up the ability to have a critical sense of what they're watching. They need to see, everyone needs to see fake news. Everyone, know thy enemy, keep your enemy close. If you really do need to kind of have an understanding of where they're coming from, because it's not like they're crazy aliens who landed on the planet that want to take us over. They're citizens. We walk in the street with them, we ride in the tram with them, and they have every right to have their opinion, but we need to be able to kind of separate what is valuable and essential to information and knowledge, and then listen to the clutter around it. I don't for an instant ever think that you should shut anyone down unless they are kind of streaming into the places where they are breaking the law, where they are inciting riot, where they are, really pushing the bounds. Then yes, you have to address that. And yes, you've got to shut them down. But if they're operating within the norms of liberal Western democracy, then they have every right to their opinion. The sad thing, or the glad thing now, is that they have access to everyone if they're clever in social media, if they understand the platform, if they understand, how to to sell what they're doing. To me, the issue is, that's not the issue. The issue is, are we teaching our kids from the primary school age, who are all now very media savvy, to be able to critically approach all of these platforms that they're using? That's the essential thing. In Australia, I don't think so. I'm not keen to anything. You know, I can find almost anything I want. But certainly outside this country, absolutely. You know, I don't know if you can call an algorithm an agent of censorship, but perhaps it is, because it will divert you away from what might be the news in favour of what your past search habits have been. You know, if you look at the centralisation of media, particularly in the US, then is that censorship just because of the power of the conglomerates that run it? Are the Murdochs censorious? They're certainly censorious, but are they censoring? Is an editorial opinion of a publication or of publishers like Murdoch censoring by not telling all the news, by having a very obvious, very particular bent towards the right and supporting them and using their newspapers and television shows to publish outright lies? That's censorious, but it's not censoring, it's excluding. It's, I remember reading a fabulous, well not fabulous, but quite scary article a year or so ago. You know, as Murdoch wiped out regional press, shut down all of the hard copy publications and centralised them all into the online market, and how when News Limited wanted to kind of push an idea, it went to social media to do it, and it sold lies. It captured interest because what it did was buy into the lowest common denominator fear. And in particular in states like Queensland and in rural Queensland, where they could very easily run campaigns that fed that fear to suit their political agenda. And their political agenda is well established. They are to the right, they support the LNP, that is the parliament, that's the party that they want to see in power. So they will do anything to support that. So that's a kind of overarching and scary media control. They have the power, they have the money, they have the resources to literally to almost take control of the platforms that service their message. But at the same time, sitting beside that, there are dozens and dozens of fabulous publications that have free access and the ability to get to their readership, to get to people who want them. You know, the Saturday paper, for instance, you know, is a brilliant publication, and it sits there, it's well read, and it's at the other end of the spectrum to Murdoch's tabloids, trash tabloids. But, you know, again, because everyone has access, it again falls down to people understanding how to find other voices, how to read other things, how to hear other things, not just taking them where the algorithm leads them. It's that critical, it is where, screen and media literacy, or media literacy, is something that we really need to take a hold of in a much stronger way. I mean, I have an 8-year-old daughter who's learning coding in school. She's in a little local state school where all the kids of her age are completely colourblind. There is no race. They're completely gender neutral. They have no interest in being boys or girls. They are just people. So they are already, just through the everyday education system, being taken to a place where things that defined us so strongly are no longer there. They are learning media literacy, not directly, but because they use it every day in the classroom. So what needs to consistently happen is, in the home and in the school, how are you making those choices? Why are you making those choices? How did you get there? Those questions always have to be asked. Conspiracy is probably a part of human nature. If you make it to the doctor, the psychiatrist, it's paranoia. It's a form of paranoia. People want to be able to kind of pass the blame on. They want to be able to say, no, someone else is doing that, someone evil is doing that, it's not me, it's not us, this is being forced upon us, as if as a race of sentient beings we don't have free will, we don't have free choice. We have lots of institutions that kind of try and box us into things where we feel like we can hand that over. Religion's a great example, education can do that as well. But conspiracy, again, if the conspirators are using social media platforms and media platforms to kind of espouse their weird theories, either you enjoy them as part of the colour of the whole experience, but again, I'm sorry, I keep coming back to it, you've got to have the critical faculty. You've got to, you've actually got to, conspiracy lands in front of you and you think, they're right. And don't just accept it. You go, okay, who are you? And do the research, ask the questions. Who is responsible for this conspiracy theory? Because the other great thing about the World Wide Web is that you can find anything you need to find. You've just got to know how to look. It's as simple as that. Oh, that's a big one. Victoria is a particularly interesting state because Vic Screen was the first state agency to actually kind of pick up on the economic value of the games industry. And every state agency now is really looking at ways to invest in a human resource sense by supporting those people who want to create games into the games industry, because it's far more valuable than the screen sector in terms of dollar return, the billions of dollars invested in it. It has made some fantastic shifts in terms of it's no longer a male-dominated shoot-'em-up place. There are as many women playing games as there are men. There are more women producing content for games, which makes what's being made more interesting. And despite the fact that its birthplace was the marriage between Paramount Studios and the Pentagon in military exercises, and they were all shoot-'em-up, bang-bang games, that's no longer the case. There are wonderful narratives, fantasies, there are all sorts of different things going on. And the other interesting thing is that the community of gamers who connect around the world and play together because they're like-minded, they enjoy the game together. I mean, I've got a nephew who is autistic and socially terribly inept, but plays games with his cohort around the world and communicates in a way there that he can't in a classroom. There's upsides and downsides to everything. The interesting thing will be to see, you know, to me, for that reason, it's very important that we start to incorporate gameplay into the classroom. It's already there, but not as something to be studied, analysed. It's just there as something to be used as an educational tool. And it is, I mean, it's a huge employer now, massive employer, multi-billion-dollar business internationally, which is why the agencies are all kind of going, you know, we need an ROI on our money from the government. If we put it into games, then there are clear pathways, and they're quick. They're much quicker than 10 years of developing a feature film. Oh, it's destroyed it. It's completely, you know, you can see it simply, and you know, not so long ago in the nature of our newspaper, hard copy newspaper publications. They used to be run on advertising, on the you know, the classifieds, on all of the advertising that came into them, and that, you know, once you know, Domain, for instance, in the real estate market was set up as the place to sell and buy, rent houses, newspapers lost all of that revenue. The advent of, across all of the popular social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, of the influencers who are able to kind of build up their subscribers, and so therefore their channels carried advertising. You know, it is such a fractured market now. You know, the annoying thing is, again, you know, if the algorithm will drive ads to your personal social media platform because of what you're watching, what you consume. So all of a sudden you'll start to get bombarded with ads that match what you're watching. But the really nice thing is you can turn them off. You just go click. You know, you just go. This is the other thing. You know, if you watch free-to-air commercial television, which I don't, probably haven't for about 40 years, I can always remember as a kid, you know, watching the favourite Friday night movie on Channel 10, and then there would be a whole run of ads, and all you had to do was sit there and wait or walk away or do whatever. But the consumer now actually has probably a lot more power than they realise to control the ads that they're watching, to control what they want to see. And that's, you know, that's a kind of major shift. But that means that the content producers, the platform owners, are doing everything in their power to stop you doing that. They still want to be able to get their little ad message in front of you. Look, you know, you can, in terms of social media impact on cultural life, community life, I think it's had a massive impact, both bad and good. You know, the bad, the most obvious indicator of the negative is the moves that governments now need to make against online bullying. You know, the ability for an individual or a group to attack another person or another group online and to do it savagely and viciously is the worst of the worst part of human nature. To be able to exercise that control and get away with it is terrible. But the other side is that people who formerly, in the pre-social media, pre-digital age, would have to book a trunk call, would have to send a snail mail, would have to wait and wait and wait to connect with and communicate with friends, family, community, can do it instantly. And, you know, the sadness, again, but brilliance of it, is how Russia was incapable of shutting down the Ukraine when it invaded, and live and direct, the world was able to see what was going on. It could never, that could have been a secret war pre-social media, but now everyone knows. Everyone knows what's going on. The Israeli invasion of the Gaza is live. So the world can see it. And that, you know, there have got to be many longitudinal studies going on about that exact thing. How does that level of access, contact, communication shift the nature of how we are with each other? You know, one example is probably going back to conspiracies. All of a sudden, there are a whole lot more conspiracies because there's a whole lot more information, because people no longer feel that there are no trusted sources anymore. So people are looking for answers everywhere. Sometimes, more often than not, they're coming across the wrong answers. Australia has been a market so dominated by US content for so long, and that was essentially a straight up strategy from the Hollywood studios and from the television studios. Because we're an English language market and small, and because we had governments that walked away from all sorts of imperatives that could have given us greater benefit from that relationship, or they could have legislated earlier than they ever did, it was always important to the US to thoroughly dominate Australia as a media market, as an entertainment market, because they could. And they did. The kind of outcome of that is that, I mean, there's a very interesting longitudinal study at the moment being done by Swinburne RMIT and Australian Children's Television Foundation with 7 to 9 year olds and their use and understanding of media. And 201, all of the kids they spoke to, kind of nominated either Little Lunch or The Investigators as their favourite television shows, but they thought they were US produced. So they had no understanding that just because it's in English doesn't mean it's American. That's the kind of undercurrent of where I'm coming from. In terms of how it's shaped us, you know, the most popular television shows, despite all this, were Australian, the highest rating. And we've had almost every 10 years a renaissance in Australian cinema, where all of a sudden there's a great and fantastic round of Australian feature films that hit the cinemas, and they do reasonably well in our own domestic market, because they're fighting against the studio domination of our cinema screens. And they're fighting against the kind of, if you like, the gamification of cinema, where the spectacle of the Marvel films, of the, you know, those massive 3D generated, unrealistic comic book films, which I don't have an issue with, but they dominate our screens and they dominate the consumption of young people coming through. But the other, the interesting fact is that there's a whole age range that doesn't even go to cinema anymore. They don't need to. They don't want to. They're not going to get what they want there. Because they've grown up consuming on handheld devices, they don't need the spectacle of the big screen, when in fact the big screen is now getting smaller and smaller and smaller as multiplexes add more and more and more screens. So, I don't think we've ever lost our voice. We've just missed opportunities to embed the fact that it's Australian made, and we will never break the back of the studio domination of cinema screens. But still what we produce, remains vital to our identity in some way. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think there needs to be a redress. But again, I go back to, if you've... The most prevalent platform used in Australian classrooms for educational resources at the moment is YouTube. Most of that content is either from the US or the UK. It's pedagogically sound, but it's not our voice. So if primary school kids are being directed by their teachers by default, by recommendation from other teachers, to a platform which is putting other voices into our classrooms, how can we expect them to grow up, leave school, and be able to go, I want to see Australian, I need to hear Australian, if their whole education, and if in entertainment, in screen entertainment, if they do go to the cinema to see a film, it's a big blockbuster, or if they are on a streaming platform, there's almost no Australian content that they can identify because the algorithm won't put it in front of them. So there are all these challenges. Look, there are kind of, they're big key issues, and they are issues which the media cannot turn away from and which the media has consistently addressed. So the information is there and the impact is evident, I think. But where I think the great conversation is going on, where the greater impact is happening, is in that social media realm, where people, if you look at the conversations that went on social media with the Yes 23 campaign, it was really interesting to see, how the cohorts of yes all came together and the cohorts of no all came together, and every now and again you'd have them dipping between each other, trying to have logical conversations. And that's so valuable. And in terms of, gender identity, in terms of cultural identity, gender identity has obviously been high, since the right to marriage passed. It was kind of amazing to watch the run up to it and all the hysteria, and then everyone just said yes, great. And all you have to do is walk in any street of any major city, it doesn't matter where in Australia, and all of a sudden there are people presenting themselves as they feel comfortable to present themselves. And as I said, in at least in my daughter's primary school, there is no gender. So, and that's rapid. That's a rapid change. And I think also because we're such a multicultural, we really are a multicultural country, there's an ability for all cultures to have voice. There's an ability for everyone to speak to each other. And it is, SBS On Demand presents the world of Australia and the world in that multicultural context. But those conversations all continue. People engage continuously. And that, to me, that's a great thing. I think, that's where in those kind of key places where people, Australians, are asked to take a good hard look at themselves and to value everything that's around them, we've done that. And we've done it really well. Well, you know, we go back to media control. I think that is one of the you know, the great ones. You know, the fact that one company can own and control so many outlets, and that we don't have a government that's prepared to stand up and do something about it. I think, you know, that's an issue. I think you need you elect leaders for a reason, and there are issues which are paramount and obvious, and we've just spoken about some of them, but there are issues that just sit underneath, like media ownership, like media control, where you need people within government who can make legislation, who can make important decisions, to be brave enough to step up and do it. But if you have a political elite who fear the media barons and won't take them on because they don't want to be trashed in every major capital newspaper, on every major free-to-air network, on every social media platform controlled by that group, then where are we? How do you deal with that? Beside that, you know, you probably do need a structure that will allow more voices to rise up and use those platforms to tell the alternate story. Hopefully that will happen.